We all know just how strong Amalgam Argonak Metal Auger is, granting daggers the unique ability to armor strip on any damage tick, which when fully built up, can do, well, that. But what if I told you that the quadratic scaling this mod possesses should be forgotten in favor for another word you never thought you'd hear again after high school math class? Quadratic scaling. Okay. Before getting to that, I think I should explain each method individually to help you understand not only how insanely strong this setup is, but also why it's something we almost never see in Warframe. The aforementioned Amalgam mod fits onto a weapon you've probably only heard about in relation to this setup, as it is nothing special. What's truly important about this mod is the way that it buffs dagger damage. As stated on the mod, damage from daggers will reduce enemy armor by 6. At first, that may seem relatively underpowered, as corrupted heavy gunners at this level possess over 8,500 armor, but Metal Auger actually functions identically to the melee exclusive mod Shattering Impact. Shattering Impact's armor strip of 6 per tick actually targets enemies' base armor values, with these gunners being a meager 500. Traditionally, this is used on gun blades whose multi-shot pellets each individually proc Shattering Impact to strip acolytes and demolists, etc. Where the Amalgam mod differs from Shattering Impact is not only that any damage can proc this strip relative to the impact limited Shattering strip, but it also carries over to status effects, namely gas. Proccing gas on enemies will create a cloud of said gas that deals a single tick of damage to all enemies within 3 meters every second. Subsequent gas procs on enemies will increase the range of this cloud by 0.3 meters, capping off at 6 meters for 10 stacks. Interestingly, Metal Auger's armor strip properties do carry over to gas, leading us to our first quadratically scaling damage buff. Since each individual enemy can spawn a cloud of their own, grouping enemies together with something like Ensnare will allow us to both stack the damage of their own clouds and also the armor strip properties they now possess. This is practical infinite scaling, as the more enemies you have grouped together, the faster you strip armor and the more gas clouds there will be damaging each enemy. In the past, this was about as far as we could take this strategy, which isn't saying this isn't one of the best builds in the entire game, but the power really stopped at group enemies, swing dagger, kill everything. Now we can do just that, but even better, with Kullervo and his first and third abilities, Wrathful Advance and Collective Curse. Wrathful is far simpler than Curse, which is where our other source of quadratic scaling comes from, but let's cover Advance quickly, as its buff is still quite potent. Tapping your ability key while not looking at an enemy will cause you to instantly teleport to your reticle as far as your range allows you to. While doing the same but looking at an enemy will also teleport you, but put you into an immediate heavy attack, bolstered by Kullervo's passive of 75% heavy attack efficiency and a bonus 100% heavy attack windup speed. Furthermore, each version of this teleport will grant Kullervo flat melee crit chance, starting off at 200%, giving 2% more per 1 power strength. This is essentially infinite red crits on any melee weapon, something that is traditionally impossible for a good reason. It's quite powerful. This also frees up a mod slot on your melee, as Sacrificial Steel or Blood Rush become redundant in this case. Moving over to the admittedly cooler ability here, we have Collective Curse. Casting Curse sends out a wave of energy in a 65-degree cone that when connecting with enemies will briefly stagger them and chain them together, which is both visually and audibly discernible. Linking enemies together does have a loose line of sight requirement similar to Pillage, as even though the wave does go through walls, you will need to see enemies you intend to link at least once during the wave's 2-second lifetime. Linked enemies inherit a very unique property where any ability or weapon damage from Kullervo and only Kullervo will be redistributed to all linked enemies, starting off at 50% of the initial damage instance per hit. While the deeper mechanics of Collective's damage redistribution are not as important here, the way its damage scales is. Obviously, dealing single target damage to chained enemies is still quite strong, but the true power here lies within AoE setups, which damage multiple enemies during the initial hit, causing the damage to cross-chain multiple times. Simply, if I were to hit 5 enemies within a 20 enemy link, those 5 enemies will all redistribute the damage done to them simultaneously, which is obviously quite a bit stronger than damaging only one. So if we apply the same principles to Curse that we did to Argonak Metal Auger, the more enemies we have linked, and in this case grouped together, the more will be cross-linking damage, thus giving us our quadratic scaling, as Curse does not have a cap on enemies linked. Combining the both of these strategies alongside Wrathful's bonus crit chance, and yeah, Since both the Gas Dagger and the Snare combo alongside Curse possesses quadratic scaling, multiplying or utilizing the both of them together will give us that word your math teacher probably mentioned a few times, quartic scaling. You know, I always said and still do say, when am I ever going to use this, looking at you, Pythagorean theorem? But then I decided to become a Warframe YouTuber. Oh, how the turntables. Okay, coming back from my shitty jokes, the builds on both Kullervo and our dagger of choice, Innodem, are relatively simple compared to everything I just explained. Firstly, the reason we go with Innodem is mainly because of limited mod space and of course its first gen incarnate properties. Activating the incarnate form grants Innodem a massive +3 range, allowing us to forego primed reach on this specific setup while also giving us 40% more attack speed. None of the perks here are particularly relevant, but here are my choices if you'd like to get the most similar setup that you can. Stance-wise, Innodem's innate Matter-Eye polarity matches both Pointed Wind and Stinging Thorn, with the former being the preferred of the two due to its higher combo multipliers and better animations. Obviously, we need gas on this setup, which can be made through Primed Fever Strike and Molten Impact. Weeping Wounds does see a very important use here, as its extra 440% status chance serves to bring us to a total 118%, clearly a necessity for proccing as much gas as possible. Organ Shatter will increase our critical damage, and remember, no Blood Rush because of Wrathful's flat 300% CC on the build you will see soon. Berserker Fury increases our melee attack speed by 70%, which when combined with Innodem's Incarnate buff of 40% makes the combos feel far smoother. Our last two mod slots are admittedly a little subjective, so let's talk about them. In terms of base damage, either Primed Pressure Point or Condition Overload will work here, obviously depending on if you prime or not. Personally, I prefer you with this setup as it's quite easy to quick melee out of secondaries, and there are some more unique interactions with Curse if doing so. Because of how Curse transmits damage, if you prime linked enemies with Viral, yet leave the target you damage alone, you'll see the other targets die before the one you shoot at. Now, how useful is this in a melee setup with grouping where we have follow through and all that stuff? I don't really know, but it's still worth knowing as it serves as a massive boost for damage through both Viral's increased health damage on armor stripped enemies and status effect multiplier, plus condition overload of course. Now, if you'd rather not, Primed Pressure Point does work here just fine. In our last slot, you could go with Gladiator Might for an increase in crit damage, yet running an electric 60/60 mod could actually prove preferable. Not only do you add status chance, but electric procs do inherit the same armor strip properties and are especially powerful in tight-knit groups, courtesy of Ensnare. Honestly, neither of these mods are needed over the other options, but they serve as large enough damage boosts that I do recommend them. Looking at Kullervo, I have Ensnare over his fourth as Recompense functions as our survivability for this build. Ever since the buffs to this ability and Overguard itself, it's actually become quite good, being both a good panic button with its 1 second invulnerability on cast, and a 0.5 second invulnerability on break, which does prevent one-shots. At 200% strength, this will cap out at 20,000 Overguard, easily achievable in a few casts. Overguard itself does also give Kullervo prime sure-footed effects, removing the need for that within our Exile slot, and allowing us to really max out on range at 280%. This will increase Ensnare's pull radius to 28 meters, which will go through obstacles, while Curse covers a massive 70 meters, though seldom will you truly notice that. Wrathful's teleport also gains the same 70 meters, which would be quite good for open worlds, while Recompense's daggers can home in on enemies within 22.4 meters here, making his survival capabilities quite strong. Strength-wise, Transient Fortitude, Multi-Augmented, and Growing Power alongside 2 normal red Archon shards give us a perfect 200% strength, equating to 100% damage redirection on Curse. Now here's the thing about this benchmark, it's not as important as you might think. Viral itself at just 1 stack gives an additional 100% more damage against afflicted enemies, essentially offsetting the loss of damage redirection on lower strength builds. That isn't me saying they function the exact same, because believe me, hitting that 100% will be a buff, but it isn't mandatory. If looking to obtain that value without the use of red shards, drop Cunning Drift and Augur Reach in favor of Power Drift and Augur Secrets, though again, prioritize either you want, as strength is not incredibly needed here, but I thought if I could hit it, why not? Casting speed is a massive buff on this build as both Ensnare and Collective are used to DPS every group you see, meaning Natural Talent fits in perfectly. Even then, I have 2 Amber Shards for another 50% on him, and I'd like to use this, so I highly recommend. Finally, energy-wise, Streamline, Arcane Energize, and Xeneric are all needed to manage the insane drains Kullervo has, as one casting rotation will cost you around 100 energy at 130% efficiency. But to close things off, when I said this scales infinitely earlier, I really meant it. Both Ensnare and Argonak with Curse have no limits on the amount of enemies you can affect, so the damage will continue to scale not only in that factor, but also because armor stripping is by far the best way to make enemies easier to kill. And in this setup, you have permanent melee red crits too, an AoE armor strip, 1 or 2 AoE status ticks, and then Curse taking all of that and just buffing the ever-living hell out of it. Thank you so much for watching, your support really means so much to me, and if you found this video helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm doing my best to make the best content I can for you guys. For those on Patreon and YouTube, your support is also very invaluable. Thank you to Peter, Scotty Nose, Bad Robot, Sage, Rave, Intellectual, SOS, and 3000, and of course everyone else on screen. If you're not a member yet, consider checking out my Patreon and YouTube memberships, as it goes a long way in ensuring I can continue to do all of this. But as always, I hope this video was informative and helpful, and I will see all of you guys in the next one. Peace!